The role of China in the fentanyl crisis is very well documented and relatively well known, at least to people who have been interested enough to research the topic. But what if China has a counter-propaganda that stands a very good chance of being believed by random people, by the public opinion, but also by the so-called experts, or even real experts, but who just happen to be experts in addictions rather than geopolitics? And I think I do have an example of it. Let's explore. Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Propaganda Basement. China Daily, Global Weekly, July the 21st to 27th, 2023. Before we get to fentanyl, there are quite a few other interesting stories in this edition of China Daily. So just like in a few episodes ago, I think it was 4 episodes ago, I was mentioning football. Once again, a regime attempt to use football for propaganda purposes. Game changer village soccer tournament brings fame and economic rewards to a once remote county in Guizhou province. And let's see what they try to promote with it and see if it doesn't resemble something. Amateur games showcase diverse ethnic cultures, tap spirit of unity. It sounds like unity in diversity, which is the EU's ludicrously insane motto. So yeah, the county and its autonomous prefecture has welcomed more than 1 million tourists since the ongoing rural soccer tournament, which began on May the 13th. So essentially, now the CCP is trying to rebuild from scratch. As I was mentioning in episode 6, they didn't like how the phenomenon around football, soccer was developing naturally, so now they try to rebuild it themselves in a more planned manner. So there you go, it brings in millions of tourists in a certain diverse area where the tournament takes place under the CCP's terms, with CCP funding, and of course with and the support of the crowds with CCP ideological guidance. So there's that. Highly interesting, of course. All right, this one is also funny. The US needs Kissinger-style wisdom. I mean, this it was really funny to get this newspaper as everyone was preparing for Kissinger's funeral. It was quite funny to have this one distributed in Cambodia, one of the countries that suffered and still does suffer tremendously as a result of Kissinger's decisions. Hailing the ex-diplomat, China reminds Washington of political courage shown during Nixon era. Senior Chinese diplomat Wang Yi on July the 19th hailed former U.S. Secretary of State for his contributions to the ice-breaking development of China-U.S. relations. At a meeting with Kissinger in Beijing, Wang, director of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission of the Communist Party Central Committee, said the former diplomat, who is now aged 100, in the meantime he has become better, zemlje mu betonom, has played an irreplaceable role in promoting mutual understanding between the two countries. Washington now needs Kissinger-style diplomatic wisdom and Nixon-style political courage in its China policies. China cherishes its friendship with old friends. Wang, who is also a member of the Politburo, was quoted by Xinhua agency as saying, "The meeting, which came after a series of visits to Beijing by senior U.S. officials, was the latest effort made by the world's two largest economies to reopen high-level communication and stabilize ties." Kissinger has made nearly 100 visits to China since his first secret trip to Beijing in 1971, which he was Assistant for National Security Affairs to then-President Nixon. That trip staged, okay, so that's background history. If the US sincerely hopes for stability across the Taiwan Strait, it should clearly and openly oppose Taiwan independence and draw a clear line with Taiwan independence separatist activities, Wang said. Kissinger underlined the importance of a stable US-China relationship for world peace, stability, and the well-being of humanity, saying that the US and China both have the ability to influence the world. So yeah, this is already a very nice blast from the past. Regardless of one's opinion about Kissinger, and I think it's not exactly a secret that mine is not particularly high, it should still be noted, and it still remains a fact, that that style of diplomacy, that style of wisdom died. It just no longer exists. And not just that because Henry Kissinger in the meantime died, but because that way of thinking is just no longer a thing. It just isn't. And the more time goes on, the more that kind of thinking is no longer a thing anywhere. I mean, even in China, since the moment of this publication, so it's been a year and a half since then, more than a year and a half by the time I published this, even the CCP itself became a little bit more nationalistic, a little bit less concerned with some of these types of policies, and whether because they want to or because they'll be forced by circumstances, this militant type of globalism will also have to reform itself. Let's put it this way. I'm not saying it will go away. I don't think it will ever go away. There's always going to be a temptation for that kind of thinking, but it will have to change itself a little bit in light of, well, the world, which has also changed. The world is always changing, and we always live in interesting times, as a Chinese proverb is fond of saying. Yeah, this is a page of things that age like fine milk. Lee calls for closer climate cooperation. Premier tells U.S. envoy Kerry addressing crisis together would benefit both nations and the world. Premier Li Qiang told the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry on July the 18th that China and the U.S. should cooperate more closely to address climate change, saying that enhanced cooperation between the two countries would not only benefit each other but also the world. Yes, I'm sure this will go very well under a Trump administration. And it will also go very well with the new wave of change sweeping through Europe, where even the old fans of this kind of policy are now trying really hard to convince us all to forget that they ever supported this kind of nonsense. So yeah, this is going to be just fine. Again, when I'm taping this, I have no idea about the result in the German general election, general snap elections, but I'm pretty sure these kinds of articles will also help a lot with the German electorate and subsequently the next German government, whichever coalition will happen to rule at that time. This one also aged like fine milk. US chip ban risks market uncertainty. Industry leaders urge Washington to rethink export curbs amid fears of reduced competitiveness. As Washington considers tightening chip export restrictions on Beijing, some of U.S. biggest semiconductor companies and industry group have called on the government to stop further controls, warning of diminished competitiveness, supply chain disruptions, and significant market uncertainty. Okay, in a year and a half, more than a year and a half that have passed since then, did this happen? No, and no, but in yellow. I mean, seriously. No, of course it didn't happen. The role of this kind of article was to try to pressure Washington not to do this, because this was quite harmful for China, still is harmful for China. These kinds of curbs are still in place and will probably be tightened even further in the second Trump administration. But if we remember, this did work for a while. Quite a few Democrats in particular were at least pretending to be highly concerned about this, because again, this kind of propaganda appeals very well to normative materialism, which is the majority ideology among these pseudo-elite, technocrat-ish kind of politicians that unfortunately still dominate the politics of both Europe and North America, although things are changing slowly. Long term, I'm actually pretty optimistic. But anyway, page 10. Yes, this is my favorite type of propaganda, probably from the whole pile, to be perfectly honest with you. US fentanyl crisis is homegrown. I mean, from overprescription to lobbying, Washington should look inward at causes of opioid epidemic. I love this kind of article. Again, it is Chinese propaganda, and its primary purpose is to divert attention away from the role of China in the whole fentanyl crisis. I'm very confident when I say this because, well, I've just completed a trip to Ecuador, which is now drug cartel central for both North and South America. And the disruption introduced in the drug market, even in the illicit drug trade, by fentanyl and by CCP-made drugs is very severe, with destabilizing effects to various countries, which now end up requiring relatively harsh solutions, like perpetual state of emergency for years, basically, and economic disruption in Ecuador, or perpetual state of emergency in El Salvador, and quite a few other places. Guatemala was in a lot of troubles. Mexico still is. And the CCP's fingerprints are all over it. Now, of course, the CCP can afford to ignore some of these controversies, especially when it comes to Latin America, because, well, you can easily avoid responding to economic inferiors. At least that's the position, the actual position of the CCP. It's much harder to do that when the US starts figuring out that maybe, just maybe, there is a Chinese problem in this whole, dare I say, shit show. So when that happens, well, you have to come up with Plan B. And Plan B is this kind of propaganda. You'll notice that unlike most other articles, this article doesn't have an author, and it's just signed Xinhua, which is one of the many state agencies in China. It purports to have been written in New York, which may indeed be true. Xinhua does have an office in New York. The US is the only country in the world that has been battling a grave opioid epidemic, and it is bent on blaming China. Well, first of all, it's not true. It's not the only country in the world. And yes, it's bent on blaming China because China is at fault. The abuse of opioids, particularly fentanyl, has overtaken gun violence and car accidents in recent years to becoming the leading case of accidental deaths, yes. Analysts said that while there are mixed factors behind the crisis, Washington should face up on its own incompetence in fixing the prolonged woe, largely out of its own making, resulting from the overprescription of legal pain medications, inadequate and piecemeal anti-drug plans, and a culture of corruption involving drug firms and politicians. And that's why I say that this is very good type of propaganda. So throughout this season, I've shown you some laughable examples of Chinese propaganda. This one is really good because this is effectively scientific lying. This portion is entirely true. Yes, there is a culture of corruption. Nobody really does pharma corruption better than the United States, which is why I always find it laughable when American politicians, especially Democrats, dare to lecture us in Europe, and especially Eastern Europe, about corruption. I'm like, bitch, the corruption in a single day in US pharma is bigger than all of the corruption combined in Eastern Europe for a whole decade. So, please spare us with your lectures. And of course, China is fully aware of this, and it's using this fact as a propaganda tool. And that's why I'm saying that this is very good propaganda, because it uses mostly true things, or entirely true things, in some aspects, and then just says, oh, well, it's all your fault. It's a form of very professional gaslighting, dare I say. Fentanyl and its derivatives are all synthetic drugs, which are synthetic opioid receptor, whatever. So, I love this. They always do this. They do this background context portion of the article, but without properly marking it, and they use all of the technical descriptions just so they establish this is what you do when you try to do a actually type of propaganda. You get into all of the technicalities which to the reader who doesn't know what he is reading, to that kind of reader, you establish authority. Look, we actually know what we're talking about here, okay? So look, this is a synthetic phenylpiperidine drug. Sorry, I suck at organic chemistry. I don't know these terms in Romanian or English or any other language. A painkiller for countless patients, has many side effects. The drug has gradually become a menace to social security across the US, a society long plagued by opioid addiction and abuse. Statistics by Council on Foreign Relations in April indicated that opioids are the leading cause of overdose deaths, which have roughly quadrupled over the last 10 years. There have been 3 waves of opioid abuse. The first one began in 1991. On one hand, this practice led to the formation of a pain-killing culture in American society. Again, this portion is entirely true, in which people are accustomed to using painkillers as a symptomatic but not a curative way of coping with illnesses. On the other hand, it led to a sharp increase of the prescription of opioids, and the number of deaths caused by opioids rose sharply. The most typical example is oxycodone, a drug developed by U.S. pharmaceutical company Purdue. Blah, blah, blah. The second wave started around 2010 as opioid pills became more difficult to obtain consistently, both by prescription and by on the street. Drug users, especially young and new ones, transitioned to heroin. The grip of this insidious drug was fueled by its potency, accessibility, and affordability. The third wave is mainly driven by synthetic opioids, primarily illicitly manufactured fentanyl. Up to 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine, became the new cash cow for the illicit drug industry. Each drug is driven by cheaper and more potent substances. The research community is warning that Wave 4 is characterized by fentanyl overdose coupled with mental health struggles. Now the epidemic is wreaking havoc on the U.S. economy and workforce, but Washington, though fully aware of it, appears at best at its wit's end over how to fix it fundamentally, if not uninterested. Without investing sufficient resources, the U.S. government left hundreds of thousands of citizens at the mercy of new and more drugs. This is the price of liberalism. There you go. So it puts you to sleep with all of these irrelevant details and a little long type of history lesson. It sounds like you're reading a Putin interview. It's very, very similar, right? Because you know the discussion is homegrown. Okay, why do I need all of these technical details? That's how you do it. That's why I like this kind of article. It's very top tier propaganda. This is not propaganda for NPCs necessarily, or it is, but not for dumb NPCs anyway. It is propaganda for educated people, people who know what they're talking about, not those trash people or garbage people who vote for MAGA, right? No, it's for us, the educated elite, of course, liberals. This is the price of liberalism. Society needs rules and regulations, and they need to be enforced, commented a British netizen who goes online by the name Bug Han. Yeah, that sounds like a very, very British name, of course. Mexican president at that time, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, in April questioned the U.S. strategy against fentanyl, saying it was relying on palliatives instead of tackling the root problem. Behind the botched response from the previous U.S. administrations and the incumbent Biden administration is a sophisticated institutional fabric that has long frayed efforts to tackle the roots of societal problems. First, U.S. politicians knuckle under money politics. True. Sizable political donations from pharmaceutical companies require them to turn a blind eye when formulating control policies for related drugs. Ironically, the US, a major chemical raw material country, has not yet permanently scheduled fentanyl-related substances. By contrast, China took the lead in including the entire category of fentanyl-related substances in a controlled regulatory list as early as May 2019, a step conducive to preventing illicit manufacturing, trafficking, and abuse of the substance. Yes, within China, because they're all made in the Golden Triangle in what is legally Myanmar, and then transported across the border to Laos, and then from there to Thailand, and then from there put on ships and shipped to the Americas. And nowadays, entire laboratories have been shipped to the Americas, particularly Colombia and Ecuador, and then manufactured there and shipped on a terrestrial route all the way to the US, but you're not supposed to mention that or know that. That's the point. The target audience of this article doesn't know any of these things. Drug makers have poured close to $2.5 billion into lobbying and funding members of the Congress in the past decade. Besides, 9 out of 10 members of the House and all but 3 of U.S. senators have taken campaign contributions from pharmaceutical companies seeking to affect legislation on everything from the cost of drugs to how new medicines are approved. This is true, and this is the portion of the propaganda that is likely to affect regular people, because regular people read this and live with, especially those on a lower economic strata, although rich people are affected by the fentanyl crisis as well. They do see the effects or know someone who has been affected by this, and then they see these realities about the fact that most of the Congress is, well, to be perfectly blunt with you, bought up by Big Pharma. And that, what does that fuel? Resentment. And from resentment, that's usually a good advantage by a geopolitical enemy, like, I don't know, maybe China, just that randomly thinking. Moreover, medical representatives who play a very important role in the US medical system lobby doctors to prescribe medicine through lecturing and funding. This is also true, giving rise to more addictions. Political polarization hinders drug control. Both parties admit they need to tackle fentanyl, but they have been stumbling over each other and stalling progress. In May, the Republican-led House approved legislation in a 289 to 133 vote that saw 132 Democrats oppose the bill, even though the White House signaled support for it. Drug control requires large funding and a detailed plan. There has been no progress in the anti-drug war started in the 70s, as the two parties have held each other back. The situation worsened as more fentanyl-related overdose deaths were registered to the US. American politicians are well aware that this fentanyl crisis was triggered by various factors, including domestic politics, the economy, and social divisions. It did not develop overnight, and it cannot be resolved overnight. However, Washington finds it much easier to blame China for its own inadequate supervision of fentanyl, when the problem is in essence demand-driven and the product of U.S. institutional failure. Yeah, I love this one. It's very top-tier kind of propaganda. Almost all of it is true. There are a few exceptions here and there in the most essential parts of it, but the rest of it is pretty damn true. And this is precisely why this kind of propaganda will work. You will see for many years to come attempts to derail attention from the Chinese problem on this one, because, well, the mess that is American Big Pharma is big enough that you can easily convince people to pay attention more to that than to China. Especially since you also have another type of Chinese-funded propaganda, which is to say, yes, but we can change the politics of our country, the US, but we cannot change China, so why not start home? Which may sound reasonable, devoid of context, but in the context where the geopolitical rivals fund resentment, that can be quite a big problem. But that's a story for another day. BRICS wall mounts resistance to dollar. Yeah, that's going just fine, except it doesn't. But I already talked quite enough about BRICS in this season. Yeah, this one is also nice. Driverless vehicle racing to the forefront. Nation on road to intelligent transports amid technological advances and policy support. Home appliances embrace smart tech. Innovations in household goods may produce opportunities for development. And it's basically a 2-page large laudatio for techno-optimism, and in this case, needless and, dare I say, likely harmful techno-optimism. Well, of course, they're going to call it technological progress, but it's really not progress at all. The CCP is a big fan of these things. And the reason the CCP is a big fan of these things is twofold. One is the self-evident one, the materialist one. They want to continue to get your money for cheap shit. But the second one is also highly important, which is information. This is something that is still not being discussed enough, and largely because too many commentators simply don't know how to approach this topic. They either don't have the knowledge or they simply don't care. And if it's the latter, then that's fine. One should have the right not to care about certain topics. I know I exercise that right with impunity, much to the annoyance of some of the people who sometimes watch whatever the sofa is doing. But the stake here is data. There has been a metaphor going on in tech circles that data is the new gold, which is not exactly true. Like every techno-optimist talking point, it contains a kernel of lies and a huge dose of exaggeration. Nevertheless, big data to be collected from private citizens has a monetary value, and it also has an intelligence value, or dare I say, a value for espionage in boomer terms. And having as many people as possible voluntarily buy up stuff that supervises them. I mean, there are already circulating memes such as, why is my washing machine using up 3 gigabytes of internet traffic? Now, of course, that's funny, but the more serious question is, why is your washing machine connected to the internet? That's not innovation. That's more like not moving at all. It's not progress at all, but just an excuse to grift off more money off of regular people, which is the innocent take on this. The less innocent take, which also happens to be my take, is that there is something more sinister going on. It's just that it's not necessarily an evil conspiracy, but more like geopolitical rivals trying to spy each other. And this is a very innocent-looking way of doing it. I mean, imagine in the 70s, the Soviet Union thinking of spying in real time, I don't know, 100 million households in the Western Bloc. I mean, that would be not, it would be a golden dream. Let's put it. It would be beyond their imagination. And of course, they would leap at that opportunity had it presented to them. Well, nowadays, the geopolitical rival China does get to do that, and even more than 100 million households in the Western Bloc. And they get to do that via smartphones and via smart TVs and via smart washing machines and smart everything. Which people also pay for it. This is one of the most astonishing developments, if you want, of so-called modern civilization, where plebs voluntarily pay money so they can be spied upon in their bedrooms. It's fascinating, and it shows just how effective propaganda can be if you can convince people to do something so monumentally stupid. And of course, China Daily gives us a sample of how they achieve it and what exactly they want from it. And of course, here they only present the innocent motives, which is, more opportunities for development, basically more money for some of the areas that host the factories and whatnot. But the less innocent motive is, of course, espionage. Always has been. Data, information has always been valuable. It's just that today you need a lot of it in bulk to be worth something, or very fine granulated one via analysis. And finally, this one is actually not necessarily propaganda, but more like geopolitics via infrastructure, the statement of intention. Dream big, basically, right? Dream big, infrastructure via geopolitics via infrastructure. 2 continents, 1 railway, with US out of Afghanistan. The idea of a Beijing-Paris train service is worth revisiting. The US left Afghanistan in a state of dangerous and monumental disorder in 21. Soon after, it made matters worse by confiscating the meager foreign exchange reserves of one of the world's most deprived countries, shamelessly claiming that it was advancing certain human rights while doing so. Therefore, it took the US 20 years and over $1 trillion to replace the Taliban in Afghanistan with the Taliban. Afghanistan remains in terrible difficulty, according to World Bank. However, let's shift our gaze from the harsh reality and review a map of Asia as we consider a relevant massive project that offers immense potential benefits to Afghanistan. China's most westerly rail service ends in Kashgar in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. The distance from Kashgar to Shanghai as the crow flies is 4,200 kilometers. The distance from Kashgar to Damascus, Syria is around 3,580 kilometers. Remarkable as it may seem, Kashgar is significantly closer to the Mediterranean Sea than it is to the East China Sea. Next, the direct distance from Kashgar to Mashhad, Iran's second largest city, which lies relatively close to the border with Afghanistan in eastern Iran, is less than 1,500 kilometers, not much further than the distance from Kashgar to Urumqi, which is Xinjiang's capital. The extensive rail system in Iran uses standard gauge tracks, as China does. Moreover, western Iran shares a border with Turkey, which also has a standard gauge rail system that is connected to the standard gauge of the European Union's tracks of the Orient Express train, which ran from Paris to Istanbul. There is an enticing possibility that China might one day be connected from Beijing to Paris by a standard gauge rail link all the way via Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey. Currently, all the China-EU rail links are more northerly and involve at least 2 rail gauge changes as they encounter the extensive Russian broad gauge system, which covers Russia and much of Central Asia. Significant planning within the 5-nation railway corridor project has already mapped out a route from China to Iran for a standard link. Under this plan, on which little work has progressed, the line would extend from half Iran, close to Mashhad, into Afghanistan and then through Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan into China. Around half of this new railway would pass through northern Afghanistan. This remains a huge and difficult undertaking, and there are further challenges. Once built, this planned link from China to the EU would not only offer Afghanistan transit income, but would also greatly relieve the country's landlocked status by providing rail access to Iran's southern ports on the Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Next, a southern link within Afghanistan could link Kabul and major natural resource deposits on this new line. This project also opens up extraordinary possibility of one day traveling on a new standard gauge Orient Express from London to Hong Kong. Several broad factors indicate that this ambitious project could ultimately proceed. It offers the possibility of creating desperately needed economy building infrastructure to help with the task of relieving Afghanistan's decades-old misery and violent instability. The US has determined that a key aspect of its global project is contain the rise of China and to throw sand into every major Chinese economic gearbox it can find. Now, however, the US can no longer do this from within Afghanistan itself. Having the US out of Afghanistan removes a significant likely impediment to securing real progress. Most important, China's can-do track record is completing major, very difficult infrastructure projects is simply unmatched. Yes, please don't notice the people being killed even after the work has been done. China has transformed itself into the most globally important builder of roads, railroads and bridges, for example. Meanwhile, although the US continues to maintain a global lead in delivering bombs and bullets to various affected jurisdictions, it increasingly looks to be not very useful when it comes to delivering major infrastructure development where it is most desperately needed worldwide. There are 2 contemporary fundamental commandments to achieve better governance, which surely should be observed. Say no to war and yes to eliminating extreme poverty. China acts on both, the US does not. We must hope that China's exceptional track record, built on adherence to these precepts, will ultimately allow it to offer crucial remedial assistance to Afghanistan. So, yeah, this is a guy from Hong Kong, Richard Cullen. Those who have been watching the space for Chinese shilling are probably aware of his work. This type of propaganda is actually not aimed at Westerners. It's mostly aimed at China's neighbors because, as this article correctly points out, where they say that, US tries to contain the rise of China by throwing sand into every major Chinese economic gearbox it can find. Yes, but the main the main inconvenience of China, of the CCP right now, is that a lot of its neighbors are not necessarily pro-American, but somewhat aligned with the US on various geopolitical aspects. And by convincing as many of those as possible to give up on those, or at least start questioning them, that would actually be helpful to China. Now, will this type of mammoth infrastructure happen? I don't think so. Not anytime soon anyway. As the article correctly admits, it's actually pretty damn complicated to do it. But the point is not necessarily to make the case for start building it right now. The point of that type of propaganda is to get the dreamers to dream of how nice it would be if they would be on China's orbit geopolitically, rather than on a Western orbit geopolitically. So yeah, geopolitics via infrastructure, and an example of dream big type of propaganda, just like with Belt and Road Initiative, which is basically a dream big type of propaganda with very little accomplishments in 16, 17 years since it's been around, but it doesn't matter, the propaganda continues to flow, and all they need after all is a nice picture with the only train that actually runs from the Belt and Road Initiative, and that's good enough for significant chunks of people. And in democracies, now, not even just in democracies. I mean, Cambodia is not really a democracy. Laos is not officially not a democracy, but nevertheless, public opinion still does matter. So, keeping the public opinion happy with this kind of crap routinely works, and it especially works in China. I just wanted to give you an example of propaganda aimed at Asians rather than Westerners. So yeah, I guess that will be pretty much it for this episode. I hope you liked it. If you do like this type of content, please do consider a donation. Please do consider becoming a member of the donor circle. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.